Mormonism Unveiled by John D. Lee, 1877. Read by Paul Martin, 2019. Copyright Paul Martin's Fine Films and Audiobooks. Chapter 20. Arrest of John D. Lee by William Stokes, Deputy United States Marshal. Wishing to give a correct account of the arrest of John D. Lee by William Stokes, Deputy United States Marshal for the District of Utah, I wrote a letter to Mr. Stokes on the 28th day of March, 1877, asking him to give the full facts, as many contradictory statements relating thereto had been in general circulation. The following letter was written by Mr. Stokes, and I know from the general character of the writer that the same is true in every particular. I give the letter in the language of the writer. It explains itself. United States Marshal's Office, District of Utah, Beaver City, Utah, April the 1st, 1877. William W. Bishop, Pioche, Nevada. My dear Sir, yours of the 28th of March, at hand and contents noted. As requested, I send you all the facts of the arrest of John D. Lee, from the time the warrants were placed in my hands until I arrested him and brought him to Beaver City. I tell it in my own way, and you can use it as you see proper. About the 1st of October 1874, warrants were placed in my hands for the arrest of Lee, Haight, Higby, Stewart, Wilden, Adair, Klingensmith and Jukes. The warrant for the arrest of Dame not being placed in my hands at the time. I received instructions from General George R. Maxwell, United States Marshal for the District of Utah, that Lee was the most important one of all those indicted, and those he wanted him arrested first, if possible, but that it was a dangerous undertaking, for he was satisfied by what he could learn that he would never be taken alive. He wanted me to take him alive, if possible, but not at too great a risk, that he did not want to give me any plan of operations or particular instructions how to act, as he believed that I knew more about that kind of business than he did, and that he did not wish to give any officer under him any plans when he was sure, as he was in this case, that it would be laying a plan to have one of his own officers killed. I took the case in hand, thinking at the time that I would have to go to Lee's place on the Colorado River. I was arranging for that trip. On the 28th day of October, 1874, I started south from Beaver City to summon jurors for the November term of the District Court of the 2nd Judicial District of Utah Territory, to be held at Beaver City. I also intended to procure a guide, if I could do so, and go to the Colorado River to make the arrest. When I reached Parawan, I learned that it was currently reported that Lee had come from the Colorado River and was then in the southern counties of Utah. He was supposed to be at Harmony, because it was known that he had some accounts due him there, which he was then probably collecting in the shape of provisions to take back with him to the river. I at once started on again, on my way south, determined to attempt to arrest him at Harmony, and to do so alone, for I did not know where reliable aid could be had. I considered there was no time to log, and I was taking no more chances to attempt the arrest alone than I would be taking if I found him at the Colorado River at his stronghold, even if backed by a strong force. On my way, I met Thomas Wynne. I told him what I was intending to do. I told him I was going to arrest Lee. Wynne said he considered it almost madness, as it was reported that several of Lee's eons were with him, and all well armed. He kindly volunteered to go with me and take even chances. We finally decided that he should go to Iron City and get help, as there were then several men there that he could depend on. He was to get these men and be at Harmony by daylight on the morning of the 30th of October. I was to go to Harmony and get there soon after dark, the night of the 29th of October, and make the arrest. If I thought I could do so and get away in safety in the cover of the night. If not, I was to find out where he was and wait for assistance. When I got to Hamilton's Fort, 8 miles south of Cedar City, I learned that Lee had left Harmony and gone back to the Colorado River by the way of Torqueville, and was then several days ahead of me. I then sent a boy out on the Iron City Road to stop Wynne and send him back. I proceeded on my way and summoned my jurors. I could hear nothing of Lee in the southern country. On my way back, I stopped at Thomas Wynne's house and got him to go over on the Sevier River to see if Lee had not gone by the way of Panguitch and stopped there to lay in more supplies. Wynne started on the 5th day of November and took Franklin R. Fish with him. They pretended to be looking for stock. They were to report to me at Parowan on the night of the 7th of November. I returned to Beaver City and made my returns. On the morning of November the 7th, I started for Parowan to meet my men, Wynne and Fish. That same day, Brigham Young went from Beaver to Parowan. He passed me near the Buckhorn Springs, I have no doubt, but that he thought I was there to assassinate him, for he had 4 of the best fighting men of Beaver City with him as a guard. They were armed with Henry rifles, and as they came up to me, the guard rode between me and their beloved prophet's carriage. But they had no reason for alarm. Brigham Young was not the man that I was after at that time. I met Wynne and Fish at Red Creek. As they were coming out of Little Creek Canyon, Wynne remarked, "Your man is there." I was very much surprised, as I had but little hope of finding Lee nearer than the Colorado River, but I found he was at the town of Panguitch and was liable to leave at any time. As the men had found that Lee had made everything ready for a start, we rode on to Parowan, where I arranged my plan of action. Fish was to go back over the mountains to Panguitch that night with instructions to come out and meet us in case Lee should start away from Panguitch. Otherwise he was to remain there and have Lee located so that he could guide us to where he was when he should arrive the next morning. I was to start back toward Beaver City on Sunday morning, the 8th day of November. I was to go on in that way until I had passed Red Creek Settlement, and then go up Little Creek Canyon. The others who were to go as my assistants were Thomas Wynne, Thomas Lefevre, Samuel G. Rogers, and David Evans. Franklin U. Fish, having gone the night before. They were to go up into the mountains in different places, and all to meet near Thompson's Mill on Little Creek. We followed this plan and met at the mill. We then went over the mountains towards Panguitch. The snow on the way would average fully 2 feet in depth, and the night was very cold. We stopped at a place about 3 miles from Panguitch for the night. I then sent David Evans into Panguitch to send Franklin B. Fish and find out it all was right, and then he was to report to us before daylight next morning when we got near the town. Long before daylight we saddled our horses and started on, for the night was bitter cold. We had no blankets with us and dared not build much fire for fear it would alarm Lee and notify him or his friends that we were there. We reached the place where David Evans was to meet us some time before daylight. He was not there. We waited until after the sun was up, but still Evans did not come. Then, thinking that my plans had been found out in some way, and that my 2 men, Fish and Evans, were captured, and more than likely blood atoned, I concluded to act quickly and effectually. We mounted our horses and dashed into the town at full speed. We found Evans and learned that Fish had not been able to locate Lee, but knew that he was in town. I then ordered my men to go to different parts of the town and to keep a good lookout, and not to let any wagon go out of town until they had searched the wagon. I inquired of the citizens about Lee, but could learn nothing from them about him. Some said they never knew him, others that they never heard of such a man, had not even heard the name. The citizens soon came crowding around in disagreeable numbers. I saw I must resort to strategy, or I and my friends were in danger, so in order to disperse the crowd, I took out my book and pencil, and took down the names of those around me. I then summoned them to assist me in finding and arresting John D. Lee. They each and all had some excuse, but I refused to excuse any of them, and ordered them to go and get their arms and come back and aid me. This worked well, for in less than 5 minutes there was not a Mormon to be seen on the streets of Panguitch. About this time I rode near Thomas Wynne, when he said, "I believe I have Lee spotted. I asked a little boy where Lee's wife lived, and he showed me the house." This was something to work on. I then rode around the house that Wynne had pointed out to me. As I turned the street corner, I saw a woman looking into a log pen, and when she saw me she turned back towards the house, then turned and walked back to the pen, and appeared to be talking to someone in the pen. She seemed to be very much excited. I rode by the house and around the lot, and while doing so I saw a little girl go out and look into the pen for a little while. She then took up a handful of straw and went back into the house. I, like Wynne, was then satisfied that Lee was in the pen. I then told Wynne to keep the place in sight, but not appear to be watching it, while I was getting ready to search for Lee. I soon afterwards met Samuel Lee. I took down his name and ordered him to assist me in searching for and arresting John D. Lee. "John D. Lee is my father, sir," said he. I told him it made no difference to me if he was his grandmother, that I was going to search the house and wanted him with me. He said he was going down to the threshing machine to see his brother Al, and started off. I drew my revolver and told him to stop. He walked right along, looking back over his shoulder to me all the time. I then spurred my horse and went in front of him. He said, "You can shoot and be damned. I am not healed, but I am going down to see my brother Al." While we were talking, Alma Lee came up and asked what was up. Sam said, "This is the officer come to arrest father." Al said, "Hell, is that all? I thought there was a dog fight. I saw so many gathered around here." He then took Sam one side and talked to him for a time. Sam soon came back and said he was ready to go with me. I then dismounted and had Wynne do the same. I first went into the house, where I found several women. I searched the house thoroughly, but found no one in it that I wanted. I then said to Sam, "We will go over to this other house." Sam very cheerfully said, "All right, come on," and started out ahead of me. When I got into the yard, I stopped, saying, "Hold on. Here is a corral out here. Let us examine that." At this, Sam came to a standstill and was very much excited, was then very certain that my man was there. I had to urge considerably to get him to go up to the corral with me. Henry Darrow, one of Lee's son-in-laws, followed us. I took a circle around the corral and then walked up to the log pen, which was used for a chicken house. This pen was about 7 feet wide, 9 feet long and 4 feet high in the clear. There was a hole close to the ground, just about large enough for a man to crawl through. I first went to this hole and looked through into the pen, but I could see nothing but some loose straw in the back end of the pen. I then discovered a little hole between the top logs, near the back end, where the straw covering was off. I went to this hole and put my eye down to it, and I then saw one side of Lee's face as he lay on his right side. His face was partly covered with loose straw. I waited a few seconds until Wen came near enough for him to hear me without my speaking, over a whisper. I then said, "There is someone in that pen." Darrow said, "I guess not." I said, "I am certain there is a person in there." "Well, if there is, it is likely one of the children," said Darrow. By this time, Wynne was in position and was holding his Henry rifle ready for instant use. Wynne and myself were alone. All my other men were in other parts of the town. Just then I saw Fish coming. I then said, "Mr. Lee, come out and surrender yourself. I have come to arrest you." He did not move. I repeated this several times, but no move was made by Lee. I then looked around to see if any of my men were coming. I saw that Fish was sitting on his horse right in front of the door and had his gun in his hand. I motioned my hand for him to come to me, but he remained still and kept watch of the house as if he was going to shoot or expected danger from that quarter. His action rather surprised me, for he was a brave man and quick to obey orders. I then looked at the house to see what was attracting his attention, and I soon saw there was enough there to claim his full time. I saw 2 guns pointed through the logs of the side of the house and aimed directly at me, and Fish was watching the people who held those guns. That looked like business. I instantly drew 2 pistols from my overcoat pocket, taking one in each hand. Up to this time I had not drawn a pistol. I put one pistol through the crack in the roof of the pen, with the muzzle in 18 inches of Lee's head. I then said to Wynne, you go in there and disarm Lee, and I promise you that if a single straw moves, I will blow his head off, for my pistol is not a foot from his head." Wynne said, "All right," and was going into the pen. Darrow then commenced to beg me not to shoot. Lee also spoke and said, "Hold on, boys, don't shoot. I will come out." He then commenced to turn over to get out of the pen, at the same time putting his pistol, which he had all the time held in his hand and lying across his breast, into the scabbard. I said to Wynne, "Stand back and look out, for there is danger from the house." Darrow continued to beg us not to shoot, saying, "Lee is an old man," etc. I told Darrow that I would not hurt a hair of Lee's head if he surrendered peaceably, but that I was not going to die like a dog, nor would I permit Lee to get away alive. Lee came out of the pen, and after straightening up, he said very coolly, "Well, boys, what do you want of me?" I said, "I have a warrant for your arrest, and must take you to Beaver with me." I then took out the warrant and read it to him. When I got to that portion of the warrant which read, "Charged with murder," he said, "Why didn't they put it in wholesale murder? They meant it." He then asked me to show him the pistol that I put through the pen and pointed at his head. He said, "It was the queerest looking pistol that I ever saw. It looked like a man's hand with the fingers cut off short." I showed it to him. It was a dragoon pistol with the barrel cut off short. He laughed when he saw it, and was not at all excited. We then went to the house. The women seemed wild with excitement, some of them crying and all unreasonable in their language. Lee told his family to be quiet, and did all that he could to pacify them. He said he considered that the time had come when he could get a fair trial, etc. I then sent and bought some wine, and took a pitcher of the liquid into the house to the women. They all took a drink. When I got to one of his daughters, who was crying bitterly, she took the glass and said, "Here is hoping that father will get away from you, and that if he does you will not catch him again till hell freezes over." I said, "Drink hearty, miss." By the time all the family had taken a drink, a large number of people had gathered around the house. I think fully 150 Mormons were there. I turned to one of my men and told him to try and find some place where we could get something to eat. Lee heard me and at once apologised for not thinking to ask us to have something to eat before that time. "But," said he, "the women folks have been making so much fuss that I have thought of nothing." He then ordered breakfast for us all. His sons gathered around him and told him that if he did not want to go to Beaver, to say so, and they would see that he didn't go. Lee then took me one side and told me what his friends proposed, and wanted to know what answer he should give them. I thought he did this to see if there was any chance to frighten me. I told him to tell the boys to turn themselves loose, that I knew I had no friends in that place except those who came with me, but we were well armed, and when trouble commenced we would shoot those nearest to us at the first and make sure of them, and then continue to make it lively while we lasted. Lee said he did not want anything of that kind to happen, and would see that the boys behaved themselves, that he thought the time had come for him to have a fair and impartial trial, and he would go with me. I then hired a team from Lee, and hired his son-in-law to drive it. We started from Panguitch soon after breakfast. We put 2 of our animals in the team, making a 4-horse team. Darrow drove, Lee and Rachel, one of his wives, and 2 of my men rode in the wagon. It was about 11 a.m. on Monday, the 7th day of November, 1874, when we left Panguitch with John D. Lee as a prisoner. We reached Fremont Springs that night at about 11 o'clock and camped there until daylight. The roads were so bad that we had been 12 hours in making 30 miles. The night was dark and cold, and having no blankets with us, we could not sleep, and to add to the discomfort, we had nothing to eat. We left Fremont Springs at daylight and reached Beaver about 10 o'clock a.m., November the 10th, 1874. We had been 24 hours without food. Lee and Rachel had fared better than we had, for they had a lunch with them. When we reached Beaver, the people were almost thunderstruck with astonishment to know that John D. Lee had been arrested. After the arrest, Lee was in my custody the greater portion of the time that he was in prison. He never gave any trouble to me or his guards. He never tried to escape, but at all times assisted the guards to carry out the instructions that they had received from the officers. This is a hasty sketch, but I trust will answer your purpose, hoping you will meet with that success which you so richly deserve. I remain your most obedient servant, William Stokes. Mormonism Unveiled by John D. Lee, 1877. Read by Paul Martin, 2019. Copyright Paul Martin's Fine Films and Audiobooks. Chapter 21. The Trial of Lee at Beaver City, Utah Territory, September 1876. A jury was sworn to try the case on Thursday, September the 14th, 1876, after which the court adjourned until the 15th, Friday morning, September 15th, 1876. The court met. Present Honourable Jacob S. Borman, Judge Sumner Howard, United States Attorney. Presley Denny, Deputy United States Attorney. James R. Wilkins, Clerk. John D. Lee, the defendant on trial, with his attorneys, Wells Spicer, J.C. Foster, and William W. Bishop. Wynne Nelson, United States Marshal, and the deputies, Wynne Stokes, Franklin Brown, and Edward Casel. The parties, having announced themselves ready for trial, the following proceedings were had. James R. Wilkins, clerk, read the indictment against Lee, pleaded with others to the jury, and stated the plea of the defendant. Sumner Howard stated the case to the jury on behalf of the people. William W. Bishop stated the case for the defendant. On motion of Sumner Howard, the court appointed A.S. Patterson, Esquire, as official court reporter in the trial of this cause when the following proceedings were had. Deposition of Brigham Young. Mr. Howard, if the court please, I now propose to offer in evidence the deposition of Brigham Young, also the affidavit of G.O.A. Smith, also a letter written by John D. Lee to Brigham Young, also the report of Brigham Young to the Department of Indian Affairs, and also the proclamation of Brigham Young. These papers have been submitted to the attorneys for the defence and they consent to their introduction. I now file them and place them in evidence to save time. Mr. Bishop, may it please your Honour, while we deny that these documents are legal evidence of the fact in the indictment as charged, We still consent to the same being introduced because we once came so near being placed in jail for offering the same papers, especially the deposition of Brigham Young and the affidavit of George A. Smith as evidence at the former trial of this defendant. We wish to see what lengths the prosecution will go in this court to convict the defendant on trial by law or without law. Our opinions as lawyers were against the admission of the evidence, but our client insists that the evidence be admitted. Contrary to our best judgment, we have consented. Let the evidence go in, and with all besides that the authorities of the church at Salt Lake City have unearthed for the perusal of our brother Howard. We now know we are fighting the indictment and also the secret forces and powers of the Mormon Church. Mr. Howard then introduced the following documentary evidence. Territory of Utah, Beaver City. In the 2nd Judicial District, the People, etc. versus John D. Lee, William H. Dame, Isaac C. Haight, et al. Indictment for murder, September the 16th, 1875. Questions to be propounded to Brigham Young on his examination as a witness in the case of John D. Lee and others on trial at Beaver City, this 30th day of July, 1875, and the answers of Brigham Young to the interrogatives hereto appended were reduced to writing and were given after the said Brigham Young had been duly sworn to testify the truth in the above entitled cause, and are as follows. First, state your age and the present condition of your health, and whether in its condition you could travel to attend in person at Beaver, the court now sitting there. If not, state why not. Answer. To the first interrogatory, he saith, I am in my 75th year. It would be a great risk both to my health and life for me to travel to Beaver at this present time. I am, and have been for some time, an invalid. Second, what offices, either ecclesiastical, civil or military, did you hold in the year 1867? Answer. I was the governor of this territory and ex officio superintendent of Indian affairs and the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints during the year 1857. Third, state the condition of affairs between the territory of Utah and the federal government in the summer and fall of 1857. Answer. In May or June 1857, the United States mails for Utah were stopped by the government and all communication by mail was cut off. An army of the United States was en route for Utah with the ostensible design of destroying the Latter-day Saints, according to the reports that reached us from the east. Fourth, were there any United States judges here during the summer and fall of 1857? Answer. To the best of my recollection, there was no United States judge here in the latter part of 1857. Fifth, state what you know about trains of emigrants passing through the territory to the west, and particularly about a company from Arkansas en route for California passing through this city in the summer or fall of 1857. Answer. As usual, emigrants' trains were passing through our territory for the west. I heard it rumoured that a company from Arkansas en route to California had passed through the city. Sixth, was this Arkansas company of emigrants ordered away from Salt Lake City by yourself or anyone in authority under you? Answer. No, not that I know of. I never heard of any such thing, and certainly no such order was given by the acting governor. 7th, was any counsel or instructions given by any person to the citizens of Utah not to sell grain or trade with the emigrant trains passing through Utah at that time? If so, what were those instructions and counsel? Answer: yes, counsel and advice were given to the citizens not to sell grain to the emigrants to feed their stock, but to let them have sufficient for themselves if they were out. The simple reason for this was that for several years our crops had been short, and the prospect was at that time that we might have trouble with the United States Army then en route for this place, and we wanted to preserve the grain for food. The citizens of the territory were counselled not to feed grain to their own stock. No person was ever punished or called in question for furnishing supplies to the emigrants within my knowledge. 8th, when did you first hear of the attack and destruction of this Arkansas company at Mountain Meadows in September 1857? Answer: I did not learn anything of the attack or destruction of the Arkansas company until some time after it occurred, then only by floating rumour. 9th, did John D. Lee report to you at any time after this Zero massacre what had been done at that massacre, and if so, what did you reply to him in reference thereto? Answer: within some 2 or 3 months after the massacre, he called at my office and had much to say with regard to the Indians, their being stirred up to anger and threatening the settlements of the whites, and then commenced giving an account of the massacre. I told him to stop, as from what I had already heard by rumour, I did not wish my feelings harrowed up with recital of detail. 10th, did Philip Klingensmith call at your office with John D. Lee at the time Lee made his report, and did you at that time order Smith to turn over the stock to Lee and order them not to talk about the massacre? Answer: no, he did not call with John D. Lee, and I have no recollection of his ever speaking to me, nor I to him, concerning the massacre or anything pertaining to the property. 11th, did you ever give any directions concerning the property taken from the emigrants at the Mountain Meadows Massacre, or know anything as to its disposition? Answer: no, I never gave any directions concerning the property taken from the company of emigrants at the Mountain Meadows Massacre, nor did I know anything of that property or its disposal, and I do not to this day, except from public rumour. 12th, why did you not, as governor, institute proceedings forthwith to investigate that massacre and bring the guilty authors thereof to justice? Answer: because another governor had been appointed by the President of the United States, and was then on the way to take my place, and I did not know how soon he might arrive, and because the United States judges were not in the territory, soon after Governor Cummings arrived, I asked him to take Judge Cradlebore, who belonged to the Southern District, with him, and I would accompany him with sufficient aid to investigate the matter and bring the offenders to justice. 13th, did you about the 10th of September 1857 receive a communication from Isaac C. Haight or any other person of Cedar City concerning a company of emigrants called the Arkansas Company? Answer: I did receive a communication from Isaac C. Haight or John D. Lee, who was a farmer for the Indians. 14th, have you that communication? Answer: I have not. I have made diligent search for it, but cannot find it. 15th, Did you answer that communication? Answer: I did, to Isaac C. Haight, who was then acting president at Cedar City. 16th. Will you state the substance of your letter to him? Answer: yes. It was to let this company of emigrants and all companies of emigrants pass through the country unmolested, and to allay the angry feelings of the Indians as much as possible. Signed, Brigham Young. Subscribed and sworn to before me this 30th day of July, AD 1875. L.S. William Clayton, Notary Public. Affidavit of George A. Smith. In the 2nd Judicial District Court of the Territory of Utah. The People, etc. versus John D. Lee, William H. Dame, Isaac C. Haight, et al., Salt Lake Company. Indictment for murder, committed September the 16th, 1857. George A. Smith, having been first duly sworn, deposes and says that he is aged 58 years, that he is now, and has been for several months, suffering from a severe and dangerous illness of the head and lungs, and that to attend the court at Beaver, in the present condition of his health, would in all probability end his life. Deponent further saith that he had no military command during the year 1857, nor any other official position except that of one of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Deponent further saith that he never in the year 1857 at Parawan or elsewhere attended a council where William H. Dame, Isaac C. Haight, or others were present to discuss any measures for attacking or in any manner injuring an emigrant train from Arkansas or any other place which is alleged to have been destroyed at Mountain Meadows in September 1857. Deponent further saith that he never heard or knew anything of a train of emigrants which he learned afterwards by rumour was from Arkansas, until he met said train at Corn Creek on his way north to Salt Lake City, on or about the 25th day of August 1857. Deponent further saith that he encamped with Jacob Hamblin, Philo T. Farnsworth, Silas S. Smith, and Elijah Hoops, and there for the first time he learned of the existence of said emigrant train, and their intended journey to California. Deponent further saith that having been absent from the territory for a year previous, he returned in the summer of 1857, and went south to visit his family at Parawan and to look after some property he had there, and also visit his friends, and for no other purpose, and that on leaving Salt Lake City he had no knowledge whatsoever of the existence of said emigrant train, nor did he acquire any until as before stated. Deponent further saith that as an elder in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints he preached several times on his way south, and also on his return, and tried to impress upon the minds of the people the necessity of great case as to their grain crops, as all crops had been short for several years previous to 1857, and many of the people were reduced to actual want and were suffering for the necessaries of life. Deponent further saith that he advised the people to furnish all emigrant companies passing through the territory with what they might actually need for breadstuff for the support of themselves and families while passing through the territory, and also advised the people not to feed their grains to their own stock, nor to sell to the emigrants for that purpose. Deponent further saith that he never heard or knew of any attack upon said emigrant train until some time after his return to Salt Lake City, and that while near Fort Bridger he heard for the first time that the Indians had massacred an emigrant company at Mountain Meadows. Deponent further saith that he never at any time, either before or after that massacre, was accessory thereto, that he never directly or indirectly aided, abetted, or assisted in its perpetration, or had any knowledge thereof except by hearsay, that he never knew anything of the distribution of the property taken there, except by hearsay, as aforesaid. Deponent further saith that all charges and statements as pertaining to him, contrary to the above, are false and untrue. Signed, George A. Smith. Subscribed and sworn to before me this 30th day of July, AD 1875. Signed, William Clayton, Notary Public. Proclamation by the Governor. Citizens of Utah, we are invaded by a hostile force who are evidently assailing us to accomplish our overthrow and destruction. For the last 25 years we have trusted officials of the government, from constables and justices to judges, governors and presidents, only to be scorned, held in derision, insulted and betrayed. Our houses have been plundered and then burned, our fields laid waste, our principal men butchered while under the pledged faith of the government for their safety, and our families driven from their homes to find that shelter in the barren wilderness and the protection among hostile savages, which were denied them in the boasted abodes of Christianity and civilization. The Constitution of our common country guarantees unto us all that we do now or ever claimed. If the constitutional rights which pertain unto us as American citizens were extended to Utah according to the spirit and meaning thereof, and fairly and impartially administered, it is all that we could ask. Our opponents have availed themselves of prejudices existing against us because of our religious faith, to send out a formidable host to accomplish our destruction. We have had no privilege, no opportunity of defending ourselves from the false, foul, and unjust aspersions against us before the nation. The government has not condescended to cause an investigating committee or other person to be sent to inquire into and ascertain the truth, as is customary in such cases. We know those aspersions to be false, but that avails us nothing. We are condemned, unheard, and forced to an issue with an armed mercenary mob, which has been sent against us at the instigation of anonymous letter writers, ashamed to father the base slanderous falsehoods which they have given to the public, of corrupt officials who have brought false accusations against us to screen themselves in their own infamy, and of hireling priests and howling editors who prostitute the truth for filthy lucre's sake. The issue which has been thus forced upon us compels us to resort to the great first law of self-preservation, and stand in our own defence, a right guaranteed unto us by the genius of the institutions of our country and upon which the government is based. Our duty to our families requires us not to tamely submit to be driven and slain without an attempt to preserve ourselves. Our duty to our country, our holy religion, our God, to freedom and liberty requires that we should not quietly stand still and see those fetters forging around, which are calculated to enslave and bring us into subjection to an unlawful military despotism, such as can only emanate in a country of constitutional law, from usurpation, tyranny, and oppression. Therefore I, Brigham Young, Governor and Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Territory of Utah, in the name of the people of the United States in the Territory of Utah, first, forbid all armed forces of every description from coming into this territory under any pretense whatever. Second, that all the forces in the said territory hold themselves in readiness to march at the moment's notice to repel any and all such invasion. Third, martial law is hereby declared to exist in this territory from and after the publication of this proclamation, and no person shall be allowed to pass or repass into or through or from this territory without a permit from the proper officer. Given under my hand and seal at Great Salt Lake City, Territory of Utah, this 15th day of September AD, 1856, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 82nd, signed Brigham Young. The letter and report of John D. Lee to Brigham Young in regard to the Mountain Meadows Massacre were here introduced as evidence. Report of Brigham Young, Office Superintendent of Indian Affairs, GSL City, September the 12th, 1857. Honourable James W. Denver, Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Washington, D.C. Sir, enclosed please find abstract account, current and vouchers from 1 to 35, inclusive also abstract of employee for the current quarter up to this date, as owing to the stoppage of the mail I have deemed it best to avail myself of the opportunity of sending by private conveyance, not knowing when I may have another chance. The expenditures, as you will observe by the papers, amount to $6,411.38, for which I have drawn my drafts on the Department, favour of Honourable John M. Burnhissel, Delegate to Congress from this territory. You will also observe that a portion of those expenditures accrued, which may need a word of explanation. Santa Clara is in Washington County, the extreme southern county of this territory, and this labour was commenced and partly performed, seeds, grain, etc., furnished prior to the time that Major Armstrong visited those parts of the territory, hence failed to find its way into his reports, and failed being included in mine, because the accounts and vouchers were not sooner brought in and hence not settled until recently. But little has been effected in that part of the territory at the expense of the government, although much has been done by the citizens in aiding the Indians with tools, teams, and instructions in cultivating the earth. The bands mentioned are parts of the Pied tribe of Indians, who are very numerous, but only inhabit this territory. These Indians are more easily induced to labour than any others in the territory, and many of them are now engaged in the common pursuits of civilised life. Their requirements are constant for wagons, ploughs, spades, hoes, teams and harness, etc., to enable them to work to advantage. In like manner, the Indians in Cache Valley have received but little at the expense of the government, although a sore tax upon the people. West and along the line of the California and Oregon travel they continue to make their contributions, and I am sorry to add, with considerable loss of life to the travellers. This is what I have always sought by all means in my power to avert, but I find it most difficult of any portion to control. I have for many years succeeded better than this. I learn by report that many of the lives of the emigrants and considerable quantities of property have been taken. This is principally owing to the company of some 300 or 400 returning Californians who travelled these roads last spring to the eastern states, shooting at every Indian they could see, a practice utterly abhorrent to all good people. Yet I regret to say, one that has been indulged in to a great extent by the travellers to and from the eastern states and California. Hence the Indians regard all white men alike as their enemies, and kill and plunder whenever they can do so with impunity, and often the innocent suffer for the deeds of the guilty. This has always been one of the greatest difficulties that I have had to contend with in the administration of Indian affairs in this territory. It is hard to make an Indian believe that the whites are their friends and that the Great Father wishes to do them good when perhaps the very next party which crosses their path shoots them down like wolves. The trouble with the Indians only exists along the line of travel west, and beyond the influence of our settlements. The Shoshones are not hostile to travellers as far as they inhabit this territory, except perhaps a few called snake diggers, who inhabit, as before stated, along the line of travel west of the settlements. There have, however, been more or less depredations the present season north, and more within the vicinity of the settlements owing to the causes above mentioned, and I find it of the utmost difficulty to restrain them. The sound of war quickens the blood and nerves of an Indian. The reports that troops were wending their way to this territory has also had its influence upon them. In one or two instances, this was the reason assigned why they made the attack which they did upon some herds of cattle. They seemed to think that as it was to be war, they might as well commence, and began to lay in a supply of food while they had a chance. If I am to have the direction of the Indian affairs of this territory, and expected to maintain friendly relations with the Indians, there are a few things that I would most respectfully request to be done. First, the travellers omit their infamous practice of shooting them down when they happen to see one. Whenever the citizens of this territory travel the road, they are in the habit of giving the Indians food, tobacco, and a few other presents, and the Indians expect some such trifling favours, and they are emboldened by this practice to come up to the road with a view of receiving much presents. When therefore travellers from the States make their appearance, they show themselves in might with the same view, and when they are shot at and some of their numbers killed, as has frequently been the case, we cannot but expect them to wreak their vengeance upon the next train. Secondly, that the government should make more liberal appropriations to be expended in presents. I have proven that it is far cheaper to feed and clothe the Indians than to fight them. I find, moreover, that after all, when the fighting is over, it is always followed by extensive presents, which, if properly distributed in the first instance, might have averted the fight. In this case, then, the expenses of presents are the same, and it is true in 9/10 of the cases that have happened. Third, the troops must be kept away, for it is a prevalent fact that whenever they are the most of these, we may expect to find the greatest amount of hostile Indians and the least security to persons and property. If these items could be complied with, I have no hesitation in saying that so far as Utah is concerned, travellers could go to and from, pass and repass, and no Indian would disturb or molest them or their property. In regards to my drafts, it appears that the department is indisposed to pay them, for what reason I am at a loss to conjecture. I am aware that Congress separated the office of Superintendent of Indian Affairs from that of Governor, that the salary of Governor remained the same for his gubernatorial duties, and that the Superintendent's was $1,500. I do think that, inasmuch as I perform the duties of both offices, that I am entitled to the pay appropriated for it, and trust that you will so consider it. I have drawn again for the expenditure of this present quarter as above met forth. Of course you will do as you please about paying as you have with the drafts for the 2 last quarters. The department has often manifested its approval of the management of the Indian affairs in this superintendency, and never its disapproval. Why then should I be subjected to much annoyance in regard to obtaining the funds for defraying its expenses? Why should I be denied my salary? Why should appropriations made for the benefit of the Indians of this territory be retained in the Treasury and individuals left unpaid? These are questions I leave for you to answer at your leisure, and meanwhile submit to much course in relation thereto as you shall see fit to direct. I have the honour to be most respectfully your obedient servant, signed Brigham Young, Governor and ex officio Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Utah. Certified to by James Jack, Notary Public of Utah Territory at Salt Lake City, August the 15th, 1873. Abstract from Report on Brigham Young. The following is an abstract from a letter under heading and date as follows: Office of Superintendent of Indian Affairs, GSL City, Utah, January the 6th, 1858. Honourable James W. Denver, Commissioner of Indian Affairs, Washington City, D.C. Sir, on or about the middle of last September, a company of emigrants travelling the southern route to California poisoned the meat of an ox that died and gave it to the Indians to eat, causing the immediate death of 4 of their tribe and poisoning several others. This company also poisoned the water where they were encamped. This occurred at Corn Creek, 15 miles south of Fillmore City. This conduct so enraged the Indians that they immediately took measures for revenge. I quote from a letter written to me by John D. Lee, farmer to the Indians in Iron and Washington counties. About the 22nd of September, Captain Fancher and company fell victims to the Indians' wrath near Mountain Meadows. Their cattle and horses were shot down in every direction, their wagons and property mostly omitted to the flames. Lamentable as this case truly is, it is only the natural consequence of that fatal policy which treats the Indians like the wolves or other ferocious beasts. I have vainly remonstrated for years that travellers against pursuing so suicidal a policy, and repeatedly advised the government of its fatal tendency. It is not always upon the heads of the individuals who commit such crimes that such condoned punishment is visited, but more frequently the next company that follows in their fatal path becomes the unsuspecting victims, though peradventure perfectly innocent. Of this character was the massacre of Captain Gunnison and party in 1853. He was friendly and unsuspecting, but the emigrant company that immediately preceded him had committed a most flagrant act of injustice and murder upon the Indians, escaped unscathed, causing the savage feeling and vengeance which they had so wantonly provoked to be poured upon the head of the lamented Gunnison. Owing to these causes, the Indians upon the main travelled roads leading from this territory to California have become quite hostile, so that it has become quite impossible for a company of emigrants to pass in safety. The citizens of the territory have frequently compromised their own safety and other peaceful relations by interfering in behalf of travellers, nor can they be expected to be otherwise than hostile so long as the travelling community persists in the practice of indiscriminately shooting and poisoning them, as above set forth. In all other parts of the territory except along the north and south routes to California, as above mentioned, the Indians are quiet and peaceful. It is owing to the disturbed state of our Indian affairs that the accounts of this quarter have been so considerably augmented. It has always been my policy to conciliate the native tribes by making them presents and treating them kindly, considering it much more economical to feed and clothe them than to fight them. I have the satisfaction of knowing that this policy has been most eminently successful and advantageous, not only to the settlements, but to the government as well as to the emigrants and travellers. But the most uniform, judicious and humane course will sometimes fail in holding ignorant, wild and revengeful Indians by the wrist to be indiscriminately murdered. We trust henceforward such scenes may not be reenacted, and the existing bad feeling among the native tribes may become extinguished by a uniform, consistent, humane and conciliatory course of superior acts by those who profess superior attainments. Respectfully, I have the honour to remain your obedient servant, Brigham Young, Governor and Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Utah. Certified as correct by James Jack, Notary Public of Utah Territory at Salt Lake City, August the 15th, 1876. The following circular, issued by Brigham Young and Daniel H. Wells, was then read in evidence. Great Salt Lake City, September the 14th, 1857. Colonel William H. Dame, Parowan, Iron County. Herewith you will receive the Governor's proclamation declaring martial law. You will probably not be called out this fall, but are requested to continue to make ready for a big fight another year. The plan of operations is supposed to be about this. In case the United States government should send out an overpowering force, we intend to desolate the territory and conceal our family's stock and all of our effects in the fastness of the mountains where they will be safe, while the men waylay our enemies, attack them from ambush, stampede their animals, take their supply trains, cut off detachments and parties sent to the canyons for wood or on other service, to lay waste everything that will burn, houses, fences, trees, fields and grass, so that they cannot find a particle of anything that will be of use to them, not even sticks to make a fire to cook their supplies. To waste away our enemies and lose none. That will be our mode of warfare. Thus you see the necessity of preparing first secure places in the mountains where they cannot find us, or if they do, where they cannot approach in force, and then prepare for our families, building some cabins, caching flour and grain. Flour should be ground in the latter part of the winter, or early in the spring to keep. Sow grain in your fields as early as possible this fall, so the harvest of another year may come off before they have time to get here. Conciliate the Indians and make them our fast friends. In regard to letting the people pass or repass or travel through the territory, this applies to all strangers and suspected persons. Yourself and brother Isaac C. Haight in your district are authorised to give such permits. Examine all such persons before giving them permits to pass. Keep things perfectly quiet, and let all things be done peacefully, but with firmness, and let there be no excitement. Let the people be united in their feelings and faith, as well as works, and keep alive the spirit of the Reformation. And what we said in regard to saying the grain and provisions, we say again, let there be no waste. Save life always when it is possible. We do not wish to shed a drop of blood if it can be avoided. This course will give us great influence abroad. Signed, Brigham Young, Daniel H. Wells. Certified to under seal by James Jack, Notary Public, August the 16th, 1876.